Let the record show that today's meeting, consisting of a special Board of Education meeting dated February 20, 2013 of Rialto Unified School District, has just begun. Call to order, the roll call. We have one absentee, and that is Mr. Vice President Montes, and I understand he'll be here 5 minutes, perhaps late. And Ms. Yabora, don't believe will be here today? No. Okay, so let's move on to public hearing. But before we do that, let's start with a flag salute. And Ricardo, would you honor us?
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand. Put your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ricardo. Want to thank everybody that's in attendance for participating and taking time out of their busy schedules to be here today. Looks like we're a full house. President? Mr. President? We'll start with public hearing. Comments from the floor. At this time, any person wishing to speak to any item not on the agenda will be granted 3 minutes to make a presentation. Dr. Wallace?
We have none.
We have none. Next, we have comments on agenda items. Any person wishing to speak to the item on the agenda will be granted 3 minutes to make a presentation. Dr. Wallace? And we have none. Next, we have budget and comparative analysis report. I believe it's been prepared by Kathleen O'Sullivan, Director, Management Consulting Services, Lewis Wiley, Jr., Director, Management Consulting Services. And with that introduction, would you like to begin?
Yes. Should we sit up there?
Yeah. I'd probably be able to see that.
Member of the board, if you please, there's a reserved seat because the information will be presented on the PowerPoint. I think we save seat for you. Now, I'd like to remind the board, you received a book with all the detail information over the weekend, which is my office sent it to you. Dr. Seaborn's office sent it to you on Friday. That's also prepared by Kathleen and Luis. The presentation there summarized from that book, so you can refer to the book which you have received, or perhaps you've gone over the information you received over the weekend. So at this time, I'll turn over to Luis to begin the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. Dr. Wallace, members of the board, thank you for allowing us this opportunity to present to you our budget review and comparative analysis of the Rialto Unified School District. Again, my name is Lewis Wiley, and today I'm presenting with my colleague Kathleen O'Sullivan. Our presentation is divided up into 2 parts. I'm going to handle the budget review portion of the presentation, and Kathleen is going to cover the comparative analysis. We hope to get through the slides here and allow ample time to provide for you to ask questions as you see fit. And so with that being said, we're going to dive right in. As the first slide says, a budget review involves us taking an objective look at the revenues and expenditures associated here with the district. And the period that we covered is the first interim, and that is what's really described here on this first slide, the whole purpose of our study, to take an objective look at the revenues and expenditures of the district. Now, if you do not eat, breathe, and sleep numbers like I do, it's real easy to confuse a budget review with an audit. And so we're just going to go over it really quick here to kind of help you distinguish the two, because there's a fundamental difference between the two. A budget review, we're looking at where you're going with your revenues and expenditures, your projections, your forecasts, your budget assumptions. But an audit looks at what has happened in your revenues, expenditures, and your balance sheet accounts. And that we did not do. We did not express an opinion on your financial statements or anything like that. We purely did a budget review of the district's first interim and the processes around that, as you'll see a little bit later. It's real easy to confuse the two, but we wanted to make sure that we separated those in your mind. Now, how did we go about our budget review? Well, if you think of a budget review, you probably envision Kathleen and I going through a lot of your reports, like required first interim report, past first, second interims, your unaudited actuals, your budget, actuarial studies, enrollment projections, and that's what we did. We went through all of those documents with a fine-tooth comb, looking for the information that's used to prepare that documentation. We even take it a step further, and we actually interview department staff. We interview department staff to get a feel for the processes and the procedures around preparing the district's first interim, the processes that go into preparing the budget. We also interview department heads to get a feel for what is it like when department heads are actually preparing the budgets for their departments, to get a feel for the documentation that's being used, the documentation that's being provided by the business office, all in an effort to prepare the district's adopted budget. And so that's another part of our process. But again, our work's focused solely around the district's first interim. And what I'd like to share with you is that as part of this process, we examined the district's budget assumptions. And based on our review of the district's budget assumptions, the district is using the most reasonable and the most accurate information available when it's preparing its budgets. And so we looked at the budget assumptions, and we also made sure that the district's multi-year projections, the district's cash projections, as well as the processes behind building the district's revenue limit, all those processes, we found the information to be accurate and prepared in a reasonable manner, and we didn't find any areas of concern in those areas. We would have noted that in the report, but those areas were clean in our opinion. We also, as part of our study, we took 6 districts and we surveyed those districts for a couple of pieces of information, and I don't want to steal Kathleen's thunder, but we polled those districts to try to get a feel of a couple of things. A, how they staff their district offices, as well as the types of dollars that they pass on to their school sites for unrestricted general fund allocations. And so Kathleen will tell you a little bit more about that part of the study a little bit later. But that goes to sum up our approach to this study. I feel like my voice is vibrating. Is it working okay, or do I have a loud enough voice to where I do not need the microphone? I think I should use it.
You need the microphone.
I need it?
Because we're being televised and recorded.
Okay, great. I'll
good.
continue to do so.
You're doing fine.
All right, thank you. This next slide gives you kind of an overview of how our report came together. And I won't read each of the different components, but it's important to know that the detailed report that we provided to the district on Friday covered all of the areas that you see here on this slide. And so as a result of the work that we did over each of these areas, we came up with about 30 recommendations, and those are provided in the report. But really in our presentation, what we're trying to do is just kind of highlight some of the areas that we think are worth bringing to the board's attention, and we're going to focus on those in the next few slides. So in the area of budget development, this is where we actually get into looking at the budget assumptions, the processes and the procedures behind building the multi-year projections, the revenue limit, cash flow, et cetera, and as I stated, it's using the most available information, and everything appeared to be accurate, and the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed. However, you know, I come from a big school district in the Central Valley, and I know the feeling of what it's like when you're pulling together the budget process. It's real easy to get locked into focusing only on the general fund, especially when you're in a district when you have a lot of categorical dollars. And that was one of the things we noticed as we were reviewing the processes and the procedures and how things are pulled together in the district, that the district has a tendency sometimes to focus solely on the unrestricted side of the general fund, rightfully so, but we often have to think about how we use those categorical programs as part of that process. If you look close and you do it strategically, categorical programs can do a lot to complement what you're doing on the unrestricted side. And so what we wanted to do is just kind of point out and remind the district that it needs to do a better job of making sure that categoricals are part of the conversation when they're beginning those budget discussions. Again, categoricals can be used to help the unrestricted side as well as complement some of the other categorical programs that you have going on in the district. And so we just wanted to remind the district about that, to avoid those missed opportunities and to avoid some of the things that I'm going to point out a little bit later, like high carryovers in a handful of categorical programs. Now, on this next slide, we're just kind of, if you're like me, you learn better by pictures rather than words. We have a diagram that kind of illustrates the district's MYPs for the first interim. And so we're highlighting three components of the MYPs, one being the restricted, the reserve for economic uncertainty, as you see with the red bars for the first 3 years, as well as the projected ending fund balance. And then at the very bottom of the slide or the figure, we have the deficit spending. And so as you can see, we've made one adjustment here, and that is for illustration purposes, we pulled out the $9.6 million that the district had out in year 3, 14-15, that allows the district to have a balanced budget, but by removing that, you will see that the district has a fund balance problem out in the third year, and we're just purely doing that for illustration purposes. The district has some work to do, and we recommend that the district move swiftly to deal with the $9.6 million in adjustments as it has proposed in its first interim report. It's extremely important that the district pay attention to that. The deficit spending down at the bottom, you can see is deficit spending over the past or over the next 3 years. And I'm going to talk a little bit about deficit spending a little bit later, but it's something that we have to pay attention to. Deficit spending is a bad word in budgets, and you'll see why a little bit later. The reason why deficit spending is a bad word is it's a fancy way of saying that we are spending more than what we are bringing in. That is the layman definition of deficit spending. So if you're spending more than what you're bringing in, what are you spending? You're spending your reserves. You're spending your savings account. And those are things that, with all of the uncertainty at the state level, with all of the talk about how things are moving very slowly in Sacramento in terms of funding schools, we need our reserves. A school like Rialto needs its reserves when you look at the declining enrollment that you've been dealing with. A school like Rialto needs its reserves when you look at the deficit spending that I'm talking about now. And so it's something that we really have to focus on. And we have to keep it on the forefront of our conversations when we are putting together our budgets and having those conversations. We have to remember that we're in a stage of deficit spending, and we have to make the moves to correct that deficit spending. Now, it hasn't been easy for your district on the revenue side when you look at the trend of declining enrollment in your district. Now, as the slide says here, over the past 5 years, as we've shown, we're showing how the district's enrollment has declined. And I'm not going to read the numbers to you. I think you're all aware that your district has been in a period of declining enrollment. But what's important to point out is your district's not alone. A little more than half the districts in the state of California are experiencing declining enrollment. But we focus on declining enrollment. Why? Because school districts are paid based on the number of students that they serve. And so if you're serving fewer students, you're experiencing fewer dollars. And then what schools have to do is they have to somehow find a way to ratchet down its expenditures to deal with the decreased amount of revenue that you're receiving because of the fact of your students are starting to disappear. And so again, this slide here is just mainly to drive home the point that it hasn't been easy for Rialto for the past 5 years with declining enrollment, and it's something that we have to continue to think about as we move forward in the district. Now, just for 1 minute, it's nice to stop talking about cuts, and let's talk about ways schools can help the revenue side of their district. And so on this slide here, we want to do a couple of things. We want to tip our cap to Rialto for, if you look at the district's enrollment to ADA ratio, you are 1% or just above 1% more than the statewide average for a unified district. Your district at 96.3 And the statewide average for a unified district, the ADA to enrollment ratio is at 95%. You exceed the statewide average, and that's a good thing. That's a thumbs up, and we commend the district for that. However, the district could help itself by just increasing its ADA by 1%. Increasing this ratio by 1% could generate a little more than $1 million. These are unrestricted dollars by 1%. And I know that's asking a lot, but if we think of the ways to where we can get students to come to school, it all helps the bottom line. I want to commend the district for having a couple of things in place that I think is doing a good job to help with boosting the enrollment in the district. I think the whole idea of having serving breakfast in the classroom, that's an awesome idea, and I've actually shared it with a couple of districts down that I'm working with in the north, in the Bay Area about that plan, and it's pretty innovative. Also, the fact that this step-up program that you have, that is something that you should continue to do as well. It's a way of taking the conversation for a hot minute away from cuts and trying to find ways, what can we do to increase the revenue side? And one way to do that is to try to increase your enrollment to ADA by at least 1%. Another thing that we looked at is your salaries and benefits make up about 92% of your budget. And when you make up that much of the expenditure budget, when you're preparing those salaries and benefits, you cannot afford to get that wrong. You have to get that right. And what helps us get that right is our position control. And so we spent some time working with staff, trying to get a feel for how position control worked in the district. And I think the biggest thing that kind of jumped off the page, or that came from our interviews, is that the district has kind of two processes going on. And from our perspective, just from what we've seen statewide, it's best practice that everyone do their processes in the same system, because it eliminates the chances of, if you're doing it in one system and you have to move it over to the main system, what could happen? We could have chances for error. It's not the most efficient way of doing things. Yes, we both have our own, each department has its own separate needs from each system. However, we have to make sure that one system provides or fills the needs of both departments. And so what we found is that fiscal services and HR, or personnel, needs to work together to make sure that they are both getting what they need from the EPIC system to ensure that everyone's working from the same system. We just feel it's a little inefficient to maintain two systems from a best practices standpoint. Again, when it makes up 92% of it, you cannot afford to get that part wrong. You want to make sure that you get that part right. In the area of special programs and funds, this is more in the categorical area. We found, looking at your CAT forms and going through your district records, we found where you had a handful of programs that had high carryover balances. Now, high carryover balances in your categorical programs is a bad thing, because really what it means is we're not spending today's dollars on today's kids. That's basically what it comes down to. Now, we could end up in situations where we have planned carryover, and even then we need to be extremely careful. We need to make sure that the dollar we're getting, we're using it on that student. And when you think about what these categoricals are for, they're for some of our most neediest students. And so we have to make sure that we're taking those dollars and using them in the year towards the students that help generate those dollars. And so again, monitor your, making sure that everyone that's responsible for spending those categorical dollars knows the I's that need to be dotted and the T's that need to be crossed, and how the best way to plan for spending those dollars. That's extremely important, and we think that the district needs to move in a direction to make sure everyone's able to do that, because what it does is it helps eliminate and minimize the amount of carryover that you're experiencing. And so with that being said, I'm going to pass the wand to my colleague Kathleen, who's going to take us through the comparative analysis.
Thank you, Louis. Not quite as tall as Mr. Wiley, so I'll have to adjust the microphone here. So one thing I just want to mention before I continue with the comparative analysis section is I really want to just take a minute and commend the district in taking the opportunity to complete this study right now. I think we're in kind of a new times for schools. We have been through a number of years of very difficult funding reductions and had to deal and scramble to still deliver the best education we could to students while dealing with significant cuts to our revenue. And we're also looking at potentially a new funding model that's been proposed, and we likely think that there is some function of that will materialize this year. We're not 100% sure on all the details yet, but it's likely that that's going to change. And so the district taking the opportunity to review its budget, ensure that it's using sound business practices, and also to be able to correct the issues that have happened in the past in terms of funding reductions and getting you where you need to be today, and being able to see where you need to make those corrections is, I think, invaluable as you move forward. And so then moving on to the next section that we'll talk about, the comparative analysis, as you are moving forward, the district took the opportunity to look at some data related to staffing and also some other comparative analysis of revenues and expenditures. And so this, again, gives you kind of a check-in of where are we today so that we can plan for the future. And so I'll jump in now to our section. And so one thing that I just want to mention before we start, there are kind of two different pieces of information that I'll talk about here. The first is a district office benchmarking study. And so what that is we took a look at district office FTE information. So we looked at how many folks are in the educational services division and in what departments and how are they organized. And we looked at business services, student services, personnel. And so we looked at all of the divisions, but we only looked at FTEs. I just want to emphasize that this was not an organizational review where we are actually evaluating job functions, positions, duty statements to really ensure that or evaluate whether the right person is in the right place in terms of position-wise, or do you have the same duties being covered in all departments. That's not what this was. This is really the beginning step for the for the district to evaluate its staffing. And so it gives a good starting place for the district to evaluate, do we look like we might be a little lean in this department? Do we look like we may have more people in this department compared to the other districts that we looked at? And then the district, and I think some of these conversations have already started, but it just helps to inform them further, evaluates what are the district's priorities in terms of programs and offerings for students in different departments. What are our resources available? Can we continue to support these departments? And so it's really a starting point to help inform that conversation of, do we need to make some changes in terms of staffing, and gives you a way to identify areas that you could start looking. And so the second piece of the comparative analysis is, as Louis mentioned, a revenue and expenditure analysis and enrollment analysis that was done through our statewide database data. And so all school districts report to a database that we collect at School Services of California. And the state then certifies that data. And this is data that is used if you ever entered, which hopefully not, into a fact finding. That would be something that the California Teachers Association and CSCA both use and access that data, as well as many districts, in terms of providing comparable data. And so it's an agreed upon database where we're able to really look statewide at districts and see what are folks doing in different places in terms of their revenues and expenditures. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to that, but I just want to set up that there are really kind of two different pieces here. We have the benchmarking study, and then we have the analysis of the data. And so on this slide, you can see that we identified 6 comparable districts based on enrollment, which is very important when you're looking at staffing. You want to make sure you're looking at size districts. And we also looked at demographics. Now, we had a little trouble getting some of the data from the districts. Everyone is very busy, and it was coming at a difficult time in terms of interim reports and the holidays. And so we got great response from 3 districts, but unfortunately from 2 districts we couldn't get the data. And then one of them, as the board members I'm sure noticed in the report, from Hesperia and Pomona, we provided the data that we were able to collect, but it is shaded yellow because it was not confirmed by the district. And we're trying to still get them to confirm that data, and we'll be able to provide you an update and a supplement once we get that, but we knew time was of the essence, and so we wanted to provide you the data that we had, but we think we still have very good comparative data. So as I mentioned, we'll talk now about the district office staffing study, portion of the study. And so we looked at all of the divisions and departments within the district office. And again, I'll just emphasize this did not look at school site staffing. This was just purely district office staffing. So we looked at the superintendent's office, business services, educational services, student services, and personnel. Now this is if you've seen the report, you know it's thick, it's big. And so we obviously can't go through all of that data at this point. And a big chunk of that report is the staffing data, and it really goes into detail by each department, how many FTEs, and the totals by divisions. And so what we wanted to do, though, was highlight kind of an overview of some areas where we saw that the district had higher staffing. And again, I'll just caution that this is a great place to start, but again, this is not the whole picture. We don't know, looking at these FTEs, there may be some areas where, for instance, in educational services, where some other areas of ed services may look a little leaner, but you do have other departments that many other districts don't have, and so there may be some backfill there in terms of duties and support. Again, we couldn't determine that from the FTE study. For the full-time equivalencies that we looked at in terms of staffing, but it gives you a place to start to say, okay, this is maybe an area that we need to look at to make sure we are being most efficient and using our resources wisely. And so we saw there were some departments in business services that showed that they had a higher staffing. And one of the ways that we look at staffing is looking at the FTEs. So we count up those folks that are in positions in their full-time or half-time status. But because the districts, they are of similar size, but there is some fluctuation there within that band. And so it's important that we're comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges. So we do an enrollment ratio. So the first number you see there under Rialto USD FTE staffing ratio column shows 4.0 FTEs, for example, for risk management, / 6,691 to 1. So what that means is that for every 6,990, or for every one, so maybe this is a better way to say it, every one risk management employee, there are 6,669 students enrolled, or 91 students enrolled. So that's just a way to be able to compare with different size districts to know, okay, per student numbers, how many people do we actually have there? And it's not that those employees are necessarily providing those services directly to students, it's just a way to have an apples to apples comparison. And so then in the second or the third column there, you'll see the district that had the second largest FTE or staffing ratio after Rialto, and then the district that ratio belongs to. So we saw some areas in business services and also in educational services. As I mentioned, there are a number of departments, kind of specialty departments in educational services that the district has where many other districts do not have these programs. They may have in the past, but because of funding reductions and flexibility of categorical dollars, they had to sweep those dollars into the general fund and eliminate those programs. And in student services, again, we see some areas where the programs are a little bit different and maybe a little bit richer staffed in Rialto, but again, we would just encourage you to do a little further examination in, safety and security is obviously very important, especially today in school districts. And so it may be that the district is just running that program a little differently. So as I've already mentioned, we would recommend using this FTE staffing data to continue the conversation of where do we need to look to determine if we are operating most efficiently, and are we identifying the priorities that are most important to the district and making sure that we're funding those and supporting those priorities to the district. And as I did mention also, educational services looks like it has more staffing than related to the comparative districts, and so that might be an area to start looking at. But again, we think it's important to look at all of the departments in the district office and make sure that you're really running the most efficient operation you can. So now I'll move into the analysis of the statewide data that I talked about. And so for this instance, I mentioned that we had our 6 districts and that a number of them weren't able to respond or couldn't confirm the data. But in this case, because the data is statewide, part of our database that's been certified by the state, all 6 districts were included in this comparison. We were able to access that data. And so we saw, we have much more complete analysis in the report, but to highlight some of the areas where the district had the highest expenditures per ADA, we have identified those on this slide. And I will just mention that, again, to be able to compare apples to apples, knowing that different sizes of budgets, that we look at these numbers on a per ADA basis. So we'll take that total dollar amount from the budget, divide it by the per ADA, or the ADA number to get that per. And so we see that the district office, or the district has higher staffing, or excuse me, higher expenditure levels in district administrative services, instructional administrative services, the non-management classified salaries, and employee health and welfare benefits, and certificated non-management salaries. Now, I will just point out, these numbers are very helpful for understanding how the district is allocating dollars and resources, but because you have a high per ADA dollar amount for classified salaries doesn't necessarily mean that you have the highest classified salaries, and it doesn't mean that you have the second highest classified staffing of all the districts. It's really a combination of many things that makes up this number. And so just from looking at that number, it's not fair to say, well, that must mean we pay our people the most out of everyone. So, to be able to really evaluate that, you'd need to do a staffing or a salary study and a staffing study to determine your staffing levels. But you can infer, though, that the district is maintaining its effort and putting a large effort of resources towards your classroom teachers or certificated non-management salaries, and also your classified salaries. And the district does provide very generous benefits to its employees, and that you can see on your per ADA expense. Now, I'll have some graphical displays of some of that data here in a moment, but I did just want to address, because we're talking about expenditures and revenues at this moment, the site allocations that were referred to when Lewis set up the presentation. And so we took a look at site allocations that were provided to sites by the districts, and these are those allocations that are provided at the beginning of the year. They do not include expenditures for salaries or benefits. These are purely site-based operations. And so we looked at the allocations for elementary, middle, and high schools, and we saw that at all levels, the district is providing a higher per student allocation than any of the other comparable districts. And so we just show, again, that there's significant effort being put out to the school sites, and there's the emphasis on students. And so this is, again, just another measure of that. And it was higher by a significant amount, $12 and $15. So here are the graphical displays that I mentioned. This is just showing, again, that Rialto ranked #1 for district administrative service expense. And I'll also just mention, this data is from 2010-11. There is a little bit of lag in time because it takes the state a while to certify that data. We all know how the state works sometimes. And so there's a little bit of lag there, but this is, again, the most recent state certified data. And here we show the instructional administrative expense per ADA, Rialto ranked #1. Restricted non-management classified salaries per ADA, so those are all of your classified salaries for non-management employees. And for your unrestricted employee benefit expense, you rank #2. And you can see that in the bar chart, it's easier to see that you really are putting a significant amount of your resources towards benefits. Now, the last piece of the comparative analysis has to do with student enrollment ratios. And so I just want to clarify the difference. These ratios are based on the state certified data, and they are from 2010-11. The previous ratios that were in the slide with the FTE information is based on the current year staffing that we collected from the districts. But again, this data does include all 6 comparable districts because it's part of the statewide data. And so we see that in many of the measures here, the district is right in the middle of the pack, which is a great place to be. It means that you have good staffing levels compared to others. You've been maintaining that effort over the years. You're right in the median of the group for your classroom teachers, the enrollment, your non-administrative certificated staff, so that include anyone else who's certificated but not in the classroom, and not management. For your all classified staff, clerical staff, you're right in the middle of the pack. We also look at school level administrators, and you again are right in the middle of the pack. And we did see that for this measure, the district had a higher ranked #1 out of #7 for district level administrators, meaning that per enrollment, the district reported more administrators than the other districts. I will just, again, put a little caveat that this can be dependent on districts reporting the data and classifying employees as management, administrators, or non-management. But I think You know, again, it comes back to what the district's priorities are, where the focus is, what departments are the priorities for the district, and how the district operates. But it's just a good snapshot to see, okay, where are we compared to our colleagues out there in those other districts? And it gives you a point where you can start that evaluation internally. So I'll turn it over to Louis to finish out here, and then we'll open it up for questions from the board.
Thank you, Kathleen. So, if you spent your 3-day weekend reading our report, you probably were able to determine that the report was filled, or just it provided a tremendous amount of information about the finances of your school district. But if I had to sort through all of the information in that report, or the message, I think that I would want you to take away that this whole phenomena, or this whole issue of deficit spending by your district, is something that we really need to our arms around. And the reason I say that is because deficit spending, again, I kind of gave you the layman's definition of deficit spending, the fact that you're spending more than what you have coming in, you're cutting into your reserves, and it starts to have a negative impact on your fiscal solvency, because it starts to, it cuts into your ability to meet your REU, your Reserve for Economic Uncertainty, and before you know it, you're starting to have trouble with this thing called cash. Cash is extremely important in a school district. Now, you may hear budget people like Mohammed and Sharon talk about revenues and expenditures, but I bet they also keep your attention on something called cash. Cash is extremely important. Cash is king. If you run out of cash, you no longer have the ability to pay your employees, you no longer have the ability to pay your vendors, you no longer have the ability to make the strokes on any of the debt that the district has. Cash is extremely important. That's why we keep our eye on it. And deficit spending, we start to eat into those things that we want to save for that rainy day. So we start to have a problem with our reserves, we start to have a problem with our cash, and before we know it, our county's knocking on our door. And so we have AB 1200 issues, AB 2756 issues. We won't go into detail about that, but it's something that we need to keep our eye on. We need to watch those available reserves. Now, in our report, we provided you with 30 recommendations, and Kathleen and I expect you to implement those in the next week. Come on, let's loosen up. No, really, we don't expect you to do all of that at once. But what we would recommend is that you begin to prioritize, develop a list, but I think at the top of your list, it should be getting your arms around doing what you need to do to support and address the district's fiscal solvency, especially in the area of deficit spending. And so with that being said, Kathleen and I, again, thank you for the opportunity for allowing us to come up and work with Mr. Islam and Sharon and their staff. We want to thank the department heads and the board member that took the time to interview and chat with us about the budget process and how it's impacting them. We thank you for allowing us to be here. It's a little wet in Sacramento. It's nice out here. And at this time, we'd like to open it up for questions, or however you want to handle the next part of the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you for your excellent report.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Just as a quick question, because I'm a math person and I'm seeing something doesn't add up here. On page 15, where you did the FTEs, the FTE equivalents, whatever.
Oh, yes, and I have a correction once you're finished that you reminded me of, so yes.
Okay, is it the educational services overall?
No, it's not. It has to do with one above that, but I'll address your question first. Happy
Well,
to
I'm
do.
just trying to figure out what you added to get 3850. I would assume you added everything in that section. It doesn't add up to
Right.
3850.
So no, we didn't. That's a great question. So what we did in this chart was we just highlighted, and let me, I guess I'll just, on the chart with all of the FTE information, we just highlighted those areas where the district had richer staffing or showed more staffing. So within the report is the Comprehensive Educational Services Division, and that came out to the 38.50 FTEs.
Okay.
And then, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, great. If I could just make a clarification on that same slide, I neglected to do it during my presentation, but I made a typographical error. And in that educational services section for QEIA testing and special programs staffing for the district, it should actually be 2.0. And then the ratio would be 13,382 to 1. And that's reflected correctly in the report. It just was my mistake on the PowerPoint. So I just wanted to point that out.
I believe ADA has changed throughout the state, and that's basically how we get our revenue. In your opinion, for most districts, that ADA has gone down by maybe what percentage?
You know, I want to make sure that I understand your question. Are you referring to the fact that we know for a fact that statewide enrollment is on the way, it's declining. And ADA is a direct link to enrollment.
Correct.
And so it's really hard to say the percentage that it's going down or it's declining. But I will say to you, when we go through the governor's budget and look at where the governor thinks the state is going, actually, those projections kind of show enrollment starting to turn around and go the other direction,
Not-
slowly, though.
Maybe I'm not phrasing this
Okay.
correctly. Let's say the state was paying $6,000 per student per
Right.
year, and all of a sudden it's gone down to 5,000.
Oh, okay, so,
in revenue received from the ADA.
Yes.
right, it's somewhere in the range of 20%.
See, and so we're not the only district that's going through this. So,
Not at all.
in your opinion, how many reports do you go through like this? I'm just curious.
We do quite a few a year. It's hard to quantify. Districts call us in for different reasons. And I think to answer your question, we do a significant amount of these reports, but they're for reasons such as yourself, or there could be validation of the numbers because of negotiations. But a lot of districts are requiring these types of studies.
Of the districts that required the same study that we just undertook, would you say most of them are in the same category that we're in?
More than half are in the same category that you're in.
Okay, and then those who are in a position of grace, so to speak, doing maybe a little better, based on the recommendations that you made, would you honestly say that those recommendations were followed in those successful districts that aren't in deficit spending?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well worded.
Okay. I noticed that appropriately, everything is broken out. I'm speaking to the recommendations now. Can we get a copy of all the recommendations, 1 through 30, just as one document? please?
Absolutely. When we get back, we'll put that on a document and make sure that Mr. Islam
So
gets
we can
that.
share it with our associations, because
Absolutely.
we've got negotiations coming up.
Yeah, when we make decisions, we need to follow with your recommendations, some of them.
Absolutely. In the executive summary, we try to highlight the ones that we feel should be most important, but we have no problems providing you all of those in one place. Absolutely.
Have we made sufficient cuts to keep pace with neighboring districts?
Are you speaking relative to percentage of the budget, or are you speaking to salaries and benefits?
Anything that would make the situation better?
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it really needs, that's a difficult thing to compare district to district, because, as President Ayala had mentioned, and as we confirmed, I would say more than half of the districts in the state are in a similar position. And you have, I think, kind of a little bit of a double whammy, that you had your declining enrollment really dropped kind of the beginning of the economic downturn, and so you're receiving less on a per ADA basis, but you're also receiving less on a funding level, because that's when the reduction started. And so I think to look at it, comparably in terms of a percentage of a budget that's being cut, I think is very difficult. I think, as Louis mentioned, as a percentage of what you need to do to remedy the district's deficit spending, maybe Louis, you want to jump in with?
What I wanted to say to her is that wasn't really part of our charge to kind of see what other districts are doing. What I will share with you, though, is it's just been a rough 3 or 4 years for schools, and schools are doing what they need to do to get through the rough times: furloughs, cutbacks, layoffs, and it's just a conversation that a lot of districts are having statewide. But as far as comparing your district to neighboring schools in terms of cuts and reductions and modifications, it's really hard to kind of answer that question. But I will share with you that statewide, districts are doing what they need to do to kind of weather the storm.
My concern is that when Prop 30 passed, a lot of other districts were able to make restoration to their employees and programs and things, and we are not. So that would imply to me that necessary cuts were not made in previous years to allow us to do that.
Right. Districts are unique. I think we have to kind of keep that in mind. Districts are different, and I don't want to contradict anything that Mr. Islam will say, but I agree. I believe that Mr. Islam will agree with me when I say that Prop 30 really didn't provide additional money.
No, I agree.
It kept the governor from doing, or prevents the governor from doing things to us moving forward. And so we really have to keep that in the back of our mind when we start to talk about the great things that Prop 30 has done for schools.
So the districts that did that were fiscally conservative and were making cuts within the last 4 years, that's why they're able to give back some of the things they took away from their employees, some of the programs that were taken away.
Without knowing
From
the
the
whole
students.
story, sir, yes, that could be true. That may be true. I'm sure there's some other underlying facts without knowing the whole context, but you're probably on the right path.
Were you aware that do other districts have any success in laying off employees in March and in May, and then once the budget's approved, then hire them back? Is that obviously?
It's something that schools have to deal with statewide. One of the things that we've tried to do with school services is we've tried to somehow see that they often ask us, school services, what can we do to kind of improve the process for schools? And this is one of the things that we all talk about, is this whole March 15th layoff and the amount of time that's allowed, and then the state budget comes out. And if you remember, we used to have some long, hot summers waiting for that state budget to come out. But now things are starting to be done a little bit more timelier, but you're not alone. Districts statewide have to deal with this whole issue of looking people in the face and saying, I got to let you go, but then when things turn out to be not as bad as what they thought, we bring those folks back. And I was in a large school district, 80,000 kids in the school, and we had to deal with it every year. And it's something that's unfortunate, and if we had our way, we could change it. But until then, it's something that we kind of have to live within.
One thing that I did not see in the report is the class size in the comparable districts, what the largest class size is and what the least class size, and maybe the average. That would be helpful.
You're right, that's not in there in terms of that data. It wasn't within the scope. It's something we could provide you, absolutely. I think a measure that is not exact, that's not class size, because knowing that with your high school districts you have teachers that are covering preparation time and those types of things, looking at your classroom teacher enrollment ratio, though, does show, and that was ranked very high, that in the kind of the middle of the pack there, that you are, per student enrollment, you do have more teachers than some of your other your colleagues out there. And so we can definitely provide you with that data. Again, I would just caution, unfortunately, for 2010-11 is the most recent statewide data we have for class size averages. And we know there's been a lot of change in the last 2 years just in talking to districts and seeing some other data in terms of class size waivers that have been granted at the state board with being able to exceed class sizes that are in statute. And so that is the one piece of that statewide data that's I'm not quite as comfortable with in terms of that data, but we'd be happy to provide it to you.
I apologize for not being able, I guess you guys weren't here. Mohammed gave a budget study session a couple weeks back, and he made several references to the urgency of adopting a recovery plan. What would you say, how big of a risk are we in if we don't act swiftly?
Well, I don't think I have to say, I think it was illustrated on that slide there where
Yeah.
it's clear that you obviously have a fund balance problem if you do not deal with the issue at hand associated with your deficit spending as well as the $9.6 million issue. It's severe. It's severe. You got to get your arms around it. And I think if you trust your district staff here and let them guide direction, you will be in good hands. But it's a serious issue. And the thing about it is, the reason why it's so serious is it appears, as you can see in that illustration that I brought your attention back to, it's deficit spending in the next 3 years. And when I say deficit spending, more going out than what's coming in, you are spending one-time dollars. When you start to cut into your reserves, you're spending one-time dollars. These aren't dollars that are being put there. These are one-time dollars. And you know, there's something that we say at school services. You don't want to take an ongoing expenditure and lay it next to a one-time revenue. And that's kind of what you're doing with not addressing your deficit spending.
Is having sufficient cash right now an immediate problem?
Well, part of our study is looking at your cash flow projections. And as I stated in the report, the assumptions, the process, everything's accurate. Her statements agree with the apportionment schedules. You have adequate cash. We didn't notice any month where you were in the deficit or anything. The staff is making the right decisions to ensure that you do have ample cash in place to meet your obligations as they become due. It was not an issue at all. It was not an issue at all.
So at this point, we won't need an additional loan or anything to?
Well, I'm assuming with the trans factored in, I'm not saying that you don't need to go out and get a trans. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying from what I was able to see in the cash flow projections, assuming the borrowing that the district is going to do, as well as with the revenues and the expenditures as they were laid out in the cash flows, everything appears to be accurate and reasonable. I'm not here saying, no, there's no need for the district to go out and borrow from other funds or to take the trend that they're set up to go after. That's not what I'm saying. I think you need to do what you need to do in order to make sure that you're able to pay your bills and pay your employees.
Are we in danger, do you feel, of the county converting us to a negative qualified certification?
It could be part of your conversation if you do not deal with your deficit spending.
How did we get here? I know you mentioned in the beginning that you want to emphasize that this is a particular type of analysis as opposed to an audit.
Well, let me say to you this, Mr. Montez. Schools have been on the short end of the stick at the state for a long time. And schools have to deal with, like you talked about, the March 15th issue. Schools have had to deal with seeing their revenue cut 20%. Schools have had to dealing with things like, well, if the governor's initiative doesn't pass, we're going to see a cut of X, and it's going to happen mid-year. You know, it's a tough grind for schools, and you know, it could be a variety of different reasons on how we got here, but it's not an easy field to navigate.
I just wanted to add one thing that I think is important that's unique for school districts that not, if you were out in private sector, it's different. You see your revenues decreasing, you slash, right? And you cut. But when you have students leaving with your declining enrollment or you're seeing a reduction in the per ADA revenue, those students don't leave in neat little packages of 20 students in a classroom, right? So you may have in a fourth grade class at one school, 5 students leave, and then it's scattered throughout, your K-12, you've lost 2 students in every class. That's not enough to eliminate a class, which would allow you to lay off a teacher and get the cost savings there. So you are still tasked with the, it's the privilege of educating students, but it comes at a cost that's very significant, and it can be very difficult to quickly recover when we had such severe reductions that were happening. And so, as Louis mentioned, this was not an audit, so we're not able to look at every decision that was made in the last 5 years, and maybe some cuts weren't made that should have been made at certain points, and things weren't done as aggressively as they should have been, but also acknowledge that it was very difficult and challenging for every district across the state, and you are not alone in dealing with these issues, and it's very difficult to do quickly without causing a lot of damage. So
I noticed you mentioned in the report that we did not have a strategic plan in the district. And this, I guess I'll ask Mohammed, are we working on a strategic plan that sort of is the guiding star for the district is what's in the strategic plan. We don't have one, which means the spending isn't being done in a planned and orderly way.
I believe we don't have one at this time. That's why the report reflect that district need to move in that directions, which
Okay.
guide you the direction we need to focus on our dollar we're spending. So that's the reason.
I think that needs to be a top priority.
I agree.
think, to get us back into.
I agree,
where we
and
need
that's
to be.
drive
Mr.
you
Martinez, you had
the
a question?
plan.
Thank you, President Ayala. Do you have a recommendation on how quickly we need to move from the 92% to the 85% norm for staffing costs?
Yesterday. That is not an easy thing to do, nor has it ever been quantified. It's a very good question. That it's a daunting task, and districts statewide have to deal with it, and you have to find the most rational and logical way to go about that. That's a question I can't answer, Mr. Monahan.
Put another way,
Okay?
do we have 3 years to deal with it? The multi-year projection.
I think you need to, I don't want to say 3 years, because I think your deficit spending is going to grab you before those 3 years. And
Okay.
so I think it's something that the district needs to aggressively and actively move towards addressing. But it's hard to quantify a time. When you start quantifying time, it makes things that much more challenging. But it's a great question.
But like number one priority.
I believe so.
Mr. Lewis,
Absolutely. Please call me Lewis.
when I think about when there's shortfalls and a family's father's trying to feed his family and, there's just not enough, but he cuts the portions down and everybody gets fed still. And I think the district the same way, but I also think, based on your experience, you've seen other districts maybe have certain philosophies where some chose to reduce certain departments, others chose to spread the cuts among all the departments. Based on your experience, the districts that spread among all the departments, how did they compare with the other districts in terms of harmony afterwards?
Right, and that was going to be the word. I was probably going to use the other word, morale. Morale in the district that spread the pain, so to speak, across all departments, all staff, seemed to be much higher than the district that did it all in one particular
Area.
place or area.
Makes sense. Thank you.
I got one more question. You mentioned that in your report, you mentioned that our school district when it comes to funding for our special ed students, we're actually last, or close to last, when it comes to what we spend per capita on our special ed. And that's compared to, that's comparing us to other districts that are similar size.
Right. And special sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and you're talking about the chart, right?
Yeah.
What page is that on?
I think it's on page 59. Right. You're right. Oh, that you rank 6 out of 7.
Yeah, so out of 7 districts, we're 6th in spending for special education, which is something we've been working on for the last couple of years. Another thing you said is that we actually spend more on what we send to our schools compared to other districts at the site levels, which is very difficult for me to grasp because, we're so tight for funds for resources that, our teachers have no choice but to, spend out of their own pocket supplies and materials, and, and parents are, being encouraged to, whatever they can, extra pencils, paper, whatever they can donate. So my concern is with the way that we're spending our money and with the way that our school sites are spending the money. Would you guys be able to do an audit, a thorough audit of how we've been spending our money? Because the way I look at it is, whatever the audit's going to cost, at the end of the audit, we're going to know exactly what we've been doing wrong for the last 4 or 5 years, and we'll be able to take action on perhaps eliminating some positions that we really don't need, and perhaps eliminating some programs that are not, cost effective.
So can I address just a couple of your comments first? I just want to address the special education percentage expenditures, only because I think this number also, you do have to take into account your special education population at your district. And it could be that some of these other districts that are spending a much higher percentage at this point in time in 2010-11 had a smaller population, or a larger population, excuse me, of students that they were serving. So their expenditure went up, right? Or more expensive cases that you're dealing with that require more resources from the district. So I just want to clarify that we know that the district, that has been a priority, but that may be why that number is lower. It may not be indicative of the contribution that is being provided from the general fund to backfill for special education, but just as a percentage of total expenditures, that's where you ranked that particular year. And then relative to your comments about school site allocations, couple things that I just wanted to mention. That was what the districts reported as the actual allocations that were given to school sites. Now, it's a little tricky when we look at this because there could be instances where the other districts are providing dollars to the sites in a different way, where they could be providing, throughout the year different services or resources to them that are supplementing some of that. But when we, confirmed that with them, that was the actual allocation that they gave at the beginning of the year for those operations, and so, or for those supplies and services. But I would agree with you that unfortunately many districts, I would say most of the districts across the state, you just don't have enough. And so in terms of resources, and teachers across the state are sadly having to reach into their own pockets to be able to provide services and supplies to students. And so I don't think, unfortunately, you're alone in that area, and looking at your school site allocations is not a bad thing to determine where the money is going. If that's something that you as the district decided you wanted to move forward with, we can help you with some resources on how to do that, absolutely. Wasn't part of our study. But I would, I guess, caution that it's easy to look at those dollars and say, well, where are they going? They're not using them right. But we didn't look at how those dollars were being applied. And so I would just say that if that's something the district determines as a priority in establishing how those dollars are being utilized at the site, then absolutely we can help you with that. But we didn't cover that yet. So.
Well, that would be part of the audit, right? I mean, and that's just one area of many things that an audit would be able to look into, correct?
Potentially, depending on what kind of study that was, yeah.
Whatever you agree the scope should be, that could be part of it, but
Well, what are the options of the scopes?
Pretty much whatever you would like that we have the capacity to do. So, it's at the board's pleasure and district's pleasure of how you'd like to operate.
Mr.
on that.
Martinez, you had a question?
Yes, it is also on special ed. I noticed that the actuals showed 3.8 million, and that's only one fund portion of it. And then you brought up the issue that made me think of how much are we spending per student? Basically, how many students do we have in special ed versus the other 6 comparables?
I think, again, that was kind of out of our scope in terms of looking at the number of students that you actually have in the program and then actually quantifying that against the dollars in the program. That we did not do, and that is kind of something that's kind of away from or outside of the type of study that we did. We did take a look at your contribution to special education, and I have it on, it's in the report. And really, what we're trying to point out to you is that special education is an area that requires quite a bit of assistance from the unrestricted general fund. It's on page 24 of the report, and it's the top portion where we break down special ed and we show the actual expenditures that the district needed to make from the general fund to help with keeping the fund or keeping the program where it needs to be. And so, as you can see, that your district has had a growing contribution to special ed. And we all know that it costs $1 to serve a student in special ed, but really when you look at the resources out there, we're getting we're not even getting 50 cents. We're getting somewhere between 35, 25 cents. And so it's not uncommon to see encroachment in special education. Now, where districts have the challenge is they have to look at what are we providing to our students? Are we over-identifying our students? Are we offering programs that are extremely expensive, like NPS and MPA? What kind of kids do we have in our district? Is it one of those things where go to Rialto, your kids will get served? I mean, there's a lot of that goes on, and I'm not saying that that's what happens here, but I'm saying that I've been in other districts where that's been the issue. And special ed is it's a complex and it's a important program within the district. And I'm not trying to disrespect the program at all. I'm just saying that we have to watch our expenditures in that area, and certain things, when things get out of line, you find that you start to contribute more to the program. And we did not look at that at all here. We purely stayed at a macro level in terms of what is the
Yeah,
unrestricted
regardless, we're
general
still
fund.
spending less, regardless. We're still spending less,
Well, as Kathleen tried to clarify, just looking at
right,
where you are in relation to the comparable districts,
right.
your per ADA is less, your expenditures per ADA are less than your neighbor.
Your report also mentions that although we're spending the most and the funds that we allocate to the school site, we're actually in the classroom, we're actually spending the least, not only in the comparison, but also for the, I believe for the statewide.
Which page are you on?
Page 60. And classroom expense percentage of
So
current expense.
these are two different numbers really that
Right.
we're looking at,
No,
right?
I
Okay.
understand that, but in one way, we're spending the most, and at the same time, in the classroom, we're spending the least.
So, right, so for the site allocations, you did report the highest, and this is classroom expense as a percentage of the total expense, is just looking at classroom salaries and benefits.
Right.
Right.
So we're not, it's not like our classroom salary and benefits are at the top of the state. They're actually in the
As a
lower.
percentage of your total budget, yes.
Just,
But can I just clarify just one thing, just because I don't want it to get lost, though? Just because that percentage is low doesn't necessarily mean that you have low or high salaries, because it's looking at it as a percentage of your total expense.
Right.
So, clarify, okay.
okay. And I just wanted to, for the public, special education budget, $19,283,096, as our adopted 12-13 budget on page 24.
And I would just say for special education, if you just allow me 1 second, as Louis mentioned, we stayed at a very macro level. And when we do special education studies within our company, and I'm not advocating that you need one, but I just want to be understood that it is a very complex issue. And we would do a study, potentially for a district that would be just as comprehensive as this. And we'd look at program and budget, caseloads, and it's to really evaluate those students that you're serving to determine if the expenditures are reasonable. And if you are offering more expensive programs, that maybe you need to evaluate if that's the mission of the district and how you'd want to proceed. So, again, this is just a very macro level.
Special ed study is a beast within itself.
Right.
It's a different operation, different project.
Mohammed, real quickly, have we coordinated with the county office to get everything in this EPICS program, so we're not using two programs that they were referring to? Are we working on that?
Yes, so currently we're engaged with the county schools and working to our personnel and fiscal together. We're trying to see through how could we can serve both department the need and streamline the process to avoid keeping two systems. At this time, yes, we're looking at get what systems can serve the best and serve need for the both operation.
Okay,
So we are engaged, yes.
okay.
Okay, going back to special ed, on page 24, I just want to get this clear that besides the revenues that we get for special ed from the state, that the district, Rialto, is paying out of unrestricted funds $3.2 million for special ed.
You have it right. What you are seeing is the net result. So you're seeing after our revenue comes in, what else do we need? And this is what you're seeing there. That 3.8 million is the district's contribution towards the program.
Beyond what the state
Correct.
allocates
What the
for
state and
us.
the feds are providing,
Yes.
correct.
I'd like to thank you for preparing this and presenting it in a very understandable format. It has a lot of very valuable information for us to consider. My impression after I read it this weekend was the same thing that occurred to me when Mohammed made his presentation. It appears to me that, and I'm a newly elected board member, so I want to add that in there. It appears to me that the district has been negligent in the last 4 years of implementing the reductions that were needed to avoid the crisis we are now facing. And I personally find it just extremely sad and offensive that employees are going to pay the price for this.
I agree, except correction, it should have been about 10 years.
Well, we went from an ending fund balance of 26 million 4 years ago to an ending fund balance this year of 8 million at the end of the year. So that's kind of puts
You
a
missed the
whole lot in
deficit
4
number.
years.
The deficit spending number, you didn't look at it.
I thought 4 years ago there was a $40 million reserve. Now it's 26?
I understand there was a time district had
$40 million
$40 million
reserve.
dollar going back probably 6 years ago.
4 years ago, 4 or 5 years
Yeah.
ago. Okay.
Right. And
So there's
Yes.
no need to go back 10, it's just, we could just go back 4 or 5.
We still had a deficit spending problem then.
but the board, I want to remind you, over the last 5-6 years, we lost over 4,000 students. So we cannot look at one elements.
I
We have to look at
understand that.
all the elements.
I mean,
what-
and,
There's a
and,
lot
and really,
involved.
there's so many questions. Really, an audit would probably be able to answer
Yes.
so many different questions and concerns regarding different levels of spending, different categories of monies, and really would really help us move forward in strategizing a solid plan, because how can we understand where we're going to go if we still don't exactly know where we were or where we've been? I've been on this board 2 years, and I still have a hard time understanding exactly how some of the monies we've been spending and some of the monies we spent in the past, and now we're seeing the outcome of the spending over the years, regardless if it was 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 10 years ago. The point is that we're in a crisis, And people are going to be, coming to this podium very upset. People are going to go home to their families very worried and upset. We're talking about people's lives here. We're talking about, the future of the children in this district. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands, at least for me, how important it is to completely understand how we got to where we're at right now, not just because of the cuts to spending over the years from the state level and the federal level, but how we ourselves, how can we justify pay raises, and how can we justify higher paying positions and new positions when we don't have the money to spend it? How can we justify certain types of spendings if we know, it reminds me of the Popeye cartoon, can I pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today? I mean, we can't do that. And we've been doing it, and it's obvious, because otherwise we wouldn't be in this position. But I just want to throw it out there, and I've mentioned it before, but this budget review, this comparative analysis, I think is great, but I really think it points out that we really need to look at a very forensic audit. And I know, Mr. Islam, you've only been here 3 months, and I know you stay here till 10 o'clock every weekday, and you're doing your best, but you shouldn't have to kill yourself trying to fix all of our problems. And I thank you for a lot of the things you've pointed out. We have done a lot of good things. We've showed some consultants the door. We've renegotiated some bad contracts, but we still need to do more. And I think it'd be good for the board and for the district to have an audit ASAP. And if California School Services can help us with it, maybe FICMAT can help us with it, whoever, but somebody's got to help us with it, because it wouldn't be wise for us to do an internal audit, because we want an independent audit. Somebody that'll come in with a fresh pair of eyes from the outside and take a look at exactly everything and how we've been spending it and what we did wrong and what we have to do to correct it.
If I may draw a board, perhaps you can see me if I stand here. Mr. Montez, all due respect, your concerns is valid concerns, how we get here. I look at myself, I get a disease. My first thing I need to survive, I have to cure. Then I can go back and perhaps I should join health club. Perhaps I should do exercise. Perhaps I shouldn't work late hours. Perhaps I should relax and do something, cut down my stress. Yeah, we can go back and look back and analyze, but it doesn't cure and correct my conditions today. My first urgency of the matter, you heard from the specialists. These are the specialist people. We invite them. What we're doing, proactive approach, not reactive approach. Many school districts invite them when they're in trouble. They can correct me. They're on fiscal in trouble.
Aren't we in trouble?
Well, that's why we're doing a proactive approach. I thank board to engage and allow me to invite them. I have a confidence and trust because of their expertise. Although I represent to you similar data and facts, I want to give you the full confidence. You need to have confidence every steps you have to make during this difficult time to make difficult, very uncomfortable decision we have to make. But the fact of the matter, I call it, we need to cure and correct. And from that point forward, yes, we know what caused this. We have to, the audit you're referring to, there's all kind of audit we can do. Financial audit, program audit, as they're referring to the scope. We can spend more money, I call not spend investment, to understand how we should not, how make sure we don't get back to the same place again. That's a good planning we have to have. And Mrs. O'Callaghan, you were referring to we need a strategic planning, this thing we need to have. These are good, we need to prioritize all this. But the circumstance we are now, the timing of making the right decision is critical. And this two professionals can correct me if I'm anything I say, because we need to, first of all, we need to see how we need to survive. When I say cure and correct, first of all, we need to get, come out of the conditions we are now. Then we have to have long-range planning to make sure districts sustain fiscal health at all time. Not so we didn't have to come back 5 years from now to get back to the same place and do the same thing. Then we have not correct our conditions. That helps.
I agree with you, Mohammed. The top priority has to be to fix the problem now. However, I also agree with Edgar in that some kind of very deep introspective audit is desperately needed because we need to know what has been going on, where this money has been going, and that is going to help us figure out a lot of the ways we can improve it. So,
And I'm assuming you're referring to the program audit. As you know, we do financial audit,
right. I'm talking about an external, independent, third-party audit.
Program audit, to understand how every dollar being spent, such as special ed. Financial audit we do every year. Board, you have seen the report, and that's been filed to the state. They have done different scope of their work, so they have not audited. That's why they don't want to qualify. They did the audit.
Right, we know
Yeah.
this wasn't an audit.
Right.
We know that.
Right.
And that's a great idea. I'm not disputing that, but perhaps we need to build that as a part of the plan.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Comment?
Thank you, thank you.
Mr. Martinez?
Everything we need is in here. How we got here is we're spending 92% on ways, their health benefits, their paychecks, everything that is tied to people. Statewide, that is 85%. That is how we got here. We're only spending 8% on electricity, on paper, on the mechanics of facilities. It's unhealthy. It was unseen. On page 20, the state didn't help any. Looking at what Mohammed showed us.
With all due respect, Board Clerk Martinez, this is not an audit. This is not an audit
It gives
report.
you everything. If you want intricacies of how special ed or how home to school transportation is running, whether we should do something or other, or if you want, that's fine. But to get out of the mess, to change course, we don't need anything else.
I disagree. I think an audit should be part of the strategy plan. Obviously, it's going to cost a little bit, but at the end, we're going to know exactly where we went wrong. And we're going to be able to take correct action to correct that immediately and prevent it from happening again.
We went wrong in authorizing so many Cadillac plan health benefits.
Well,
There's a lot of
that's
other
not-
things.
Yeah, we shouldn't get into this bargaining part of,
No, but you're asking.
No,
But,
I think we
you
should
know,
leave
as-
those topics for the bargaining
still have
units
the floor,
to
I
work with
believe.
staff.
Mohammed, to get this clear, we did this to help us get ready for 13, 14 school year. Am I correct? And what we're doing from now forward.
You're correct. This is
Right.
preparation and planning. These tools, simply a tools to
Right.
reconfirm, recertify the conditions. So we need to act together as a team, with all board your support.
This is to help us plan for the next
Next
school year
for
and
next year
theref-
and subsequent
and
2 years.
subsequent years.
Yes.
It's not to go back and talk about what we did wrong in previous years. This analysis right here.
You're
Is
correct.
to help us when we're planning for next year and the year beyond, the years beyond.
You're correct. It's a
Okay.
carry forward, it highlight how we perform, how we get here. Is that this also confirm what we have to do from this point forward. Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Martinez, you needed to finish.
Yes, I do have a question for Mohammed. Will the associations and this report be available to the public?
Yes, we are going to put this report after board acceptance tonight on the district website to be
Okay.
available to the public. Yes.
For the public, how we got here is on page 6820, it shows where we should be at 6820 versus 5301 is our revenue limit. The 5301 is money that the state should be giving it to us. They promise that it'll be there, and it's gotten worse over a period of time. The other is the health benefits that we wish to care for our staff with have just gone astronomically high. No one foresaw that health care would cost so much. So sometime in the past, doesn't matter when, it was negotiated that certain line items are in the contract. If you look into your health benefits for the associations, you'll understand. You know what, we all enjoy those benefits now. I alluded to the only way out of this, and I'm talking about long-term, is to make sure that we target that 85% spending on staffing. That's benefits and that's payroll. So however we get there, whether it's number of staff or benefits being curtailed, or there's ways in the negotiations for the benefit committee to say we'll take higher, we'll take a less rich plan. We'll move to a Chevy plan instead of a Cadillac plan.
Board President, Board President Ayala, I just would like to caution the board, before we point fingers, and start coming up with our own perspectives of what might be part of a bigger picture. But I'm not here, I don't want to point out anything specific, and I think an audit would be a general spectrum. Board clerk, you keep pointing out benefits and employees' salaries and benefits, but
Same here.
the point is we should leave those discussions for our bargaining units and our staff to deal with. I just want to make it clear that an audit, this is not an audit report, and until we have a thorough audit, one that California School Services would be able to provide, or perhaps FCMAT, and I'm not just talking about special ed, because believe me, I highly recommend that this board move forward with the audit for special ed, but not just special ed, particularly fiscal services, particularly some of the ways, there's a whole variety of things. Some of the stuff I've been questioning is consultant services, and even though consultant services is not, pointed out in here, this is not an audit, so we can't expect this to be the answer to all of our problems. So I just want to say that much, and before we start saying this is a problem, that's the problem, this report answers everything, I just want to encourage the board to really consider a independent third party. And I know here's the problem, we have an auditing consultant that gives us an audit every year on our fiscal services, am I correct?
Yes, we're required to do a financial audit
Okay.
every year.
Here's my problem. If I'm that consultant and you give me a 3-year contract, which we do, if we give an audited company a 3-year contract, I think it's wise business for that auditing company to, sort of last the duration of the 3-year contract, as opposed to a company that you hire one time to do exactly what it is they're going to do, and win or lose, happy or not, they're going to give their full-hearted report that one time, a thorough report. If in the first year we're not happy with the audit report, guess what? Somebody might just say, I recommend we don't use that. I recommend we don't use that auditing firm. Let's look for another one, regardless of the reasons. So I would be in favor of hiring an auditing company every year or different ones. If we continue to hire the same auditing company year after year and giving them not just a 1-year contract, but a 3-year contract, it sends the wrong message, It sends the wrong message to the public. We want to be transparent. And that's all I want to say about that. And I think they're doing a fine job, but
Mr. Montez, I want to make one point, and I want to caution you about why you do not want to have a CPA firm look at your books for only 1 year. You have to allow 3-year contract, because what happens is an auditor is able to develop what's called a comfort level, or the longer that an auditor is in your district, he's able to minimize the risk or feel a lot more comfortable about the operations of the district. If you bring an audit firm in on an annual basis, you're going to deal with a cost that is significantly higher than if you were to allow a firm to stay here 3 years or 5 years. I know this because I used to be an external auditor, and I'm trying to just provide you with some information. I'm not trying to change your viewpoint or how you see things, but what I want to share with you is one more other point. Auditors have what are called standards, and they have their reputation that's on the line. And when they have to be extremely careful not to give Rialto a clean bill of health when they're really not earning a clean bill of health. The last thing an auditor wants to happen is to be accused of giving a district a clean bill of health in order to keep the work.
and that's what we've been getting. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in the position that we're in.
Well, and I know that's out of our scope, but what I want to share with you is I want to warn you and caution you about bringing a firm in that's going to just serve you on an annual basis. And I think a firm would probably, they might push back and not want to serve you in that capacity, because auditors have to do a lot of work in that first year, and what they would be doing is they would be padding that fee with all of the work that they have to do.
And that's in regards to the annual audit.
Correct.
But the type of audit that I'm suggesting is,
Oh, I understand that
Okay.
you're talking about something different. but
Okay.
What I wanted to share with you is about
no,
what you were
thank you.
proposing doing with your financial auditors. It just wouldn't be very smart.
No, and I appreciate that.
Let's give Mr. Martinez a chance. He didn't quite finish his commentary.
Let me ask it another way, since I'm not believed by my fellow board members. Of the 92 or 93%, however you look at the number, what else is in there other than staffing and health and welfare benefits? What else could we look at that they're wanting to find out?
In that 92% is salary and benefits. It's your 1,000s, your 2,000s, and your 3,000 expenditures.
Right.
It's comprising 92% of your budget, and the 8% is made up of your books and supplies, your services and other operating expenditures, what you're spending on capital outlay. It's the other stuff that helps with the operations of the district.
But would an audit be able to also point out other things?
Well, I think you should really take heed to the analogy that Mr. Mohammed, I like the analogy. I've never heard it before, and in fact, I'm going to use it. I think you need to look at yourself prospectively, where you're going. To go back and to dig up some of the reasons how we got to where we are, there could be some validity to that. There could be some value to that. How
I have
much?
strong
I'm
reason
not
to believe.
sure. I'm not sure. It's hard to quantify. But I think looking at where you're going, I think that's probably a little more important. It's okay not to forget where we came from, but let's not dwell on it. Let's try to move forward and get the ship going in the right direction. I think that's probably a better use of your time. It's probably a better use of your resources. An audit can probably tell you, yeah, you stumbled here, you tripped here, you probably shouldn't have done that, but it's happened. That ship sailed. Let's kind of look at where we're going, and that's just an opinion.
Thank you.
May I recommend that we offer one opportunity for any board member to comment, and so we can conclude here? And
Mr. Ayala, I'd like to make one last statement, if I may, with your
Absolutely.
permissions. I want to remind the board, due to the fiscal crisis caused by the state and the economy, everything, I want to remind every school district receive what's called one-time money. Federal, you probably recall those, American Recovery Reinvestment Act Fund, Job Fund. Those money really called one time to bridge, help out conditions to sustain our business and serve our, continue our businesses and operations. Every school district, I came from larger than Rialto school district where I came from, we use those money. Those are good, but those are one time. It help us. And we are hoping tomorrow will be the better day. The better day has not arrived yet. You know, as you recall, I said Proposition 30 really helped us, moving us from intensive care to recovery room. We're in the recovery room. I hope those analogy help you. In a layman term, I'm trying to use this in every day in my life. We're in the recovery stage. If Proposition 30 did not pass, we will be in intensive care. We could be dead by now. I really mean it. And maybe every school district in the state could be in the receivership by now. Because you remember the January, the governance plan start mid-year cut. And we're blessed. And I thank everyone in this room, every one of us are taxpayers, take seriously act on that propositions. And it really helped us. But it did not improve our conditions we're operating. And all due respect to Mr. Montez, we keep on referring, Mr. Martinez, I'm sorry, is 92%. So we know the symptoms. The symptoms clear. It's crystal clear. And doing audit, I'm not saying it's a bad idea. Perhaps we need to build into the planning. So, and how we're spending our different program money, categorical programs, why there's a large carryover, how we can best utilize our money every year, and sustain fiscal solvency. As you recall, I remind you again, as a member of the board, that's your fiduciary responsibility to sustain fiscal solvency. And it is my obligation to bring you the information and assist you to make the right decision.
You're doing a good
Thank you,
job.
Mohammed.
Thank you.
Mohammed, I know you made your analogy again about, keep hoping that each year will be a better year. And the last time you brought that up, I said, oh, I keep hoping I'll win the lottery, but I don't plan my budget that way. So, I get the idea of what you're saying is you spend out of the reserves or whatever, hoping the next year would be better and you could replace it or whatever. But obviously that didn't work for us. You didn't do it. I'm just saying you in general.
Correct.
That did not work for us. And I think, as I stated earlier, this district's very important to me. And I do not want to see the children in this district suffer. And I do not want to see the employees pay a price for something that was not their fault. And that's my concern.
Thank you, Ms. O'Kelly. Joanne, any last comments?
Well, yes, I'd just like to, first of all, thank Mohammed for bringing our attention to the fact that we needed this analysis. And I would say that I did spend part of my weekend reading this. It was very clear and
Yes.
concise. And today you just solidified what you gave us in the written report. So and like I said earlier, we will take this. What we need to do is move forward, not go backward and try to talk about what we did in the past, but we will use this in our planning starting soon as we get to the point that we need to, and which is immediately.
Right.
Work on this for our budget for next year and staffing and all the other things that go into play for the next year and the years to come. Thank you. That's all I have to
Thank
say.
you, Joanne. Edgar?
I just want to thank California School Services again. I want to thank you again for clarifying to the public that this is comparison analysis, of our budget, and it's got a lot of good information in here. But you did make it clear it's not an audit, and I just think that the board sooner or later has to decide whether, like Mr. Mohammed says, or not, it could be part of the strategy plan. Because one of the things both private and public businesses do is they need to know where the money's going. Without knowing where the money's being spent or how it's being spent, you can't move forward. You just can't. Even people at home, if they have their budget, okay, so much is going to food, so much is going to bills, so much is going to gas. We need to know. I just want to make that clear. We need to know how our money's being spent. And without that knowledge, I think with that knowledge, I think we'd be able to come up with some really good strategies for the future, and possibly look at some accountability and take responsibility for our own mistakes, and perhaps look at some accountability and holding and asking for accountability, which is a word that not too many people want to bring up or discuss, but you as experienced auditors and budget investigators know that there's times where accountability has to be sought. And that's all I want to leave with my comments. That's all I want to end with. And just want to assure the public and our employees that we're going to do the best that we can. We're making progress.
Thank you, Vice President.
Thank you.
Montes, Mr. Martinez.
I'd like to thank both Kathleen and Louis. I couldn't put the report down. I love this stuff. I live and breathe it. Not as much as you, but I'm retired now. My question really goes to Mohammed for the timeline in this coming budget. I believe it's mid-May that we need to actually have the budget to the county, preparing it for the county. And the real question, bottom line, what do you need from us tonight?
Tonight, board is simply, you are not taking any actions. There's no approval, simply listening from the professionals and expert, presenting the data to you in two different report. One is a very detailed, the thick books you receive over the weekend, which you have heard from their to the presentation. So tonight there's no actions is required by the governing board. Simply this information now we need to carry forward, build our plan, action plan, and within a short timeline we have. As you recall, the part of the budget process and some of the critical timeline ahead of us, there is not a waiting time, or we don't have an option to do nothing, wait and see game. What's going to happen may revise, or perhaps what's going to happen until the state adopted their budget. We cannot do that. We don't have that luxury to do that. So point I'm making here tonight, at the next board meeting, you have to adopt the plan. A plan will lead to a fiscal solvency of the districts for next year and subsequent 2 years. Okay. As you know, we are required to present 3 years plan, not 1 year, although state only does a 1 year plan. We have to use that assumption to build 3 years plan and present to the state and the county that we will sustain the fiscal solvency. That's required by law. So our responsibility is now to, and with your support, board, we need to adopt that plan and continue work on that plan all the way to June 12 when you're going to adopt the budget. So our timeline between now, June 12 to adopt all the plans.
Thank you,
I hope I made it clear.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Edgar.
Can I just piggyback on what Board Clerk Martinez? I think what he wants to tell you is you're doing an awesome job and you have the board support. You're the third business services assistant superintendent that we've had in the last 2 years. The third. So you're making great progress, and again, I salute you. And thank you, Mr. Martinez, for asking what exactly it is we can do. And I think you've earned our support, Mohammed. But I just want to add, in the strategic plans, I'd like more than just one option, maybe a few different options, Plan A, Plan B, Plan C, as opposed to just stamp that, some options, and also think really hard about the strategy that we've been using the last few years, and laying people off only to bring them back to get the budget approved, and that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Montes. Well, I'd like to conclude by thanking Kathleen and Louis for a thorough report, Mohammed for your commentary, the audience for their patience and understanding. I want to remind everybody also that 70% of the voters out there don't have children in schools. And in the first 25 years as a public servant, I don't remember going through these kinds of challenges. The priorities have changed in the state. We have $100 billion that we're going to allocate for a bullet train, when I know we could use a good portion of that money so we wouldn't have to have these discussions. Proposition 30 just solved devastation. We're still under attack with charter schools. We need to stay working together as a family to overcome these challenges. People are trying to break us down, but I'm confident because I know that we're resourceful, that we're going to come together, and we're going to save jobs, and we're going to still teach these kids here at this school. We're going to implement resources, but I also think we will not flagrantly use resources in a way that aren't supposed to be used. So with that said, I thank you very much for your attendance, and do we have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.